I'd now like to introduce someone I've worked with for a long time now, 12 years, and 10 years, right from the beginning of this project, our first founding patron. And together we made the Choral Evensong Trust website. So you can type in your postcode and find the nearest Choral Evensong wherever you are, which is a service, 45-minute service. A lot of you have just heard, 16th century language, and we really wanted to promote this, so we built that, and then we started to work on the British Pilgrimage Trust together, and the day pilgrimage routes to all the cathedrals was Rupert's idea, and we still continue to meet up and just think about where this might go forward. And Glastonbury Music Festival is one of them, and making pilgrimage to music festivals must be an easy way to make more people pilgrims. So, without further ado, he's travelled the world, and he has travelled the world in his mind of all the religions. So, please. Rupert Sheldrake.
Thank you, Guy. I'm very pleased to be here. This is a real moment for pilgrimage. At this weekend, there was kind of blanket coverage of pilgrimage in almost all the newspapers. And yesterday, some of you may have seen a leader in The Guardian all about pilgrimage. So it's become almost mainstream even in The Guardian. So I think this is a huge change over a few years. I'm going to talk a little bit about pilgrimage as a deep archetype that I think is deep in human nature. All our ancestors, wherever we come from, were hunter-gatherers at one stage or another. And hunter-gatherers, because they hunt and gather, have to move around the landscape because you have to go and find fruit when it's in season, find game animals as they move around in their annual migrations. And as they moved around the landscape, they had particular places where they would stop with stories. The best known example are these songlines of the Australian Aborigines. But this going to particular places with their stories, I think, is very deeply embedded in human nature. And when people settled down with the Neolithic Revolution and started living in fixed settlements, then the idea of going to a sacred place persisted. And although no one really knows what Stonehenge and the other great circles were used for, it's clear that they were focused on important solar events like the solstice. And people wouldn't have been able to build them and would have had no point in building them unless they'd gone there. They didn't live there. So I think that these great sacred sites of the Neolithic period in England and all over Europe were actually places where people would go for these solar festivals and for other festivals as a kind of precursor of a pilgrimage to summer festivals, which we now have in the form of music festivals. I think they're a kind of secularized version of what's a very ancient pattern. Pilgrimage is found in all religious traditions. Buddhists go to Bodh Gaya and to other places that are important in the life of the Buddha in India. Sikhs go to Amritsar, the Golden Temple. Jews go to Jerusalem. Muslims, of course, go to Mecca, but they also have many other dargahs, the shrines of saints, of Sufi saints. And, of course, there are countless Christian places of pilgrimage. And the whole of Europe was full of these pilgrim routes in the Middle Ages, including England, which was, as everyone knows, covered with pilgrim routes to places like Canterbury and Walsingham and many others. My own interest in pilgrimage started through India. In 1968, I traveled through India. I was giving talks I've been doing botanical research at Cambridge, and I was giving talks at Indian universities in the botany departments. And so in each place I went, I was put up at the university. I was given graduate students to show me around. And the first one I went to after Delhi was Varanasi, where I was giving a talk at the Benares Hindu University. If you've been to Benares, it's a total immersion in this world of India. It's just unbelievably intense. Every few hundred yards you feel it's almost a lifetime of experiences. And so there was the Ganges, people being cremated, partially decomposed or burnt, people immersing themselves in it. But my guide, a Hindu graduate student, took me to various temples. And India is full of surprises, and I started as soon as I got there. I went into one temple, and everywhere you looked, there were rats. It was teeming with rats. I said, "Why are there so many rats here?" He said, "It is a rat temple." Made sense. The holy rat, the vehicle of Lord Ganesh, the elephant god, his vehicle is the rat. So the rat is sacred in India. It's one of the many sacred plants and animals. I later found that that is actually taken very seriously. I later lived in India for 7 years. I worked in an agricultural institute in Hyderabad, an international institute. And one night when I lived in a wing of a crumbling palace, and one night when I was sleeping, I woke up to find something walking over my face and a kind of scaly thing dragging over my cheek. It's the only time I've had sleep paralysis. I couldn't move, I couldn't scream, I couldn't shout. It was a rat. So I asked my Hindu cook to get rid of it. So the next day when I came home from work, it was in one of those live traps, the live rat in a little metal cage. So I said to him, "Well, can you kill it now?" He said, "No, Sahib, I cannot kill the rat. It is the sacred rat. It is the vehicle of Lord Ganesh." So I said, "Well, can you get rid of it?" He said, "Yes, Sahib." So he got on his bicycle, he pedalled off, and about an hour later he came back. He said he'd taken it far away and released it. And after that, as I went round Hyderabad, I noticed that all over Hyderabad there were people with these cages with rats in on the back of their bikes. They were all taking them all over Hyderabad, so the total number of rats remained the same, but they were simply redistributed. One of the other places I went on this journey was Madurai in Tamil Nadu, which has the temple of Sri Meenakshi. It's a goddess temple, and it's a massive centre of pilgrimage from all over South India. And so I found myself in what was like a scene from the ancient world, with pilgrims coming in from every direction. When you went into the temple, you could have a blessing from the temple elephant, the sacred elephant. So I had a blessing from the sacred elephant, who stood there in front of the elephant, put its trunk across and touched the top of your head to bless you. And that was really nice, because it was a symbol of Lord Ganesh. And then the trunk sort of swiveled round and came in front of you like this, where you were supposed to put a 10 rupee note to the mahout. They had a perfectly worked out system, but it was very, very nice being blessed by an elephant when you entered the temple. And then throughout the day there were various parades through the temple, statues of gods and goddesses carried throughout it, music, all sorts of ceremonies. It was a wonderful thing to see one of these great temples. And all over South India, these major temples. And the pilgrimages were like cosmic journeys. One of the things you see there are shrines to the planetary deities, and you walk around them 7 times for the blessings of the heavens. And then before you enter the temple, you always circumambulate it. You walk around it in a clockwise direction several times, because they're all going in the direction of the sun around the temple. And that makes the temple the center. So when you enter it, you've made it the center by walking around it. It's something I do here in England with cathedrals, on pilgrimages to cathedrals. I find walking around it, circumambulating it, is a very deep, ancient practice. And it really does work as making it the center. In the 19th century, these temples were even more colorful, because they usually have 7 walls or enclosures, the big temples. The outer one, things you can make as offerings, coconuts, flowers, and so on, and sacred cows. And then as you move in, they get holier and holier. In the 19th century, they had a whole section devoted to temple prostitution, temple prostitutes, which was part of it. Sex was sacred like everything else. And of course, they've been abolished, the British, and then Mahatma Gandhi put an end to temple prostitution. But the atmosphere of Hindu temples is archaic and has this sense of all cosmic life being there. And as I say, it used to include sex as part of that. When I was working in India in the 1970s and 80s, I was in charge of a unit. I was called the Principal Plant Physiologist at ICRISAT, the International Crops Research Institute for the Semi-Arid Tropics. And I was in charge of quite a large team of researchers. And I then became aware of how important it is in the lives of Hindus, because I had to sign the leave forms when people went on leave. I had to, as the head of the section, sign to give them permission to go on leave. And one of the most common reasons that the Hindu members of staff wanted to go on leave was to go on a pilgrimage. Most in Andhra Pradesh, they went to the shrine of Tirupati, Sri Venkateshwar, the Hindu god, a form of Vishnu. And they usually took several days off to go on this pilgrimage. And when they came back, they often had no hair, because one thing you do in a pilgrimage is you offer your hair to the god, and they had their head shaved. So you could tell when people had been on a pilgrimage, because they came back with their head shaved. And they always came back with prasad, which is a kind of sweets that had been blessed. So when they visited the shrine, they'd do a puja, they'd make offerings of coconuts and flowers, and have these sweets they would have blessed at the temple, and then bring back to share with their friends and family. And it was lovely. When I was working there, so almost every week someone would return from a pilgrimage and come to me and offer me prasad from their pilgrimage to include me in it. It's a wonderfully inclusive religion, Hinduism. So I very much appreciated receiving it. It was often too sweet for my taste, but nevertheless it was the thought that counted. All over India, you see pilgrims. In South India, when I lived in Tor, at particular times of the year, groups of people walking along paths by the river Cauvery. I was living on the banks of the Cauvery at the time, a sacred river, or along small roads in black robes. And they were pilgrims to the shrine of Ayappa, one of the Hindu boy gods, which is a very major shrine in South India on a sacred mountain that's only open certain times of the year. And there are millions of pilgrims every year go to that shrine on foot. And then there are others in red robes going to the shrine of Lord Murugan, another Hindu boy god. And so everywhere you went, there was this sense of pilgrimage going on. People from villages they didn't have holidays, they went on pilgrimages. So I saw these pilgrimages everywhere. Among my Muslim friends in Hyderabad, they invited me to accompany them on pilgrimages to dargahs, these shrines of Sufi saints. And each dargah had its own particular properties, each saint. There was one of them that was supposed to cure social problems and forms of madness within the family. And one evening when I arrived there, we arrived there in the afternoon, and in the evening there were families converging. And at sunset, the saint became particularly powerful. And one scene I witnessed was where there was a young woman who then became possessed and started shrieking, and she was hurling abuse at her mother-in-law. And this was okay with the family, because they said that the devil that was possessing her was coming out, and this was what it was doing. It was making her say all these terrible things. So no one stopped her. And so after about half an hour of hurling abuse at her mother-in-law, she calmed down. Mother-in-law didn't look very happy at all this, of course. And it must have been a huge release. And many people had their problems cured through that system. There was another shrine, another Hindu Muslim shrine that I went to with my friends, where people sleep in the courtyard of the shrine to receive healing dreams from the saint of the shrine. It's a form of dream incubation, sleeping in holy places to receive healing or inspiring dreams. The biblical example is of King Solomon at the high place of Gibeon. In the book of Kings, you read how King Solomon went to the high place, made sacrifices, slept there. God appeared to him in a dream and to ask from me. And Solomon said, "Give me an understanding heart." So God says, because you've asked for that and not wealth or power, I give you an understanding heart and wealth and power. So the wisdom of Solomon is rooted in a healing dream, in a visionary dream in a holy place. Now the British Pilgrimage Trust has persuaded a lot of churches to open their doors for pilgrims to sleep in them. So far it's been seen as just a convenience, somewhere to sleep at low cost, if at some discomfort. But I think that there's a much greater potential to this, because it's a very ancient tradition. In the Muslim tradition, in the Greek Orthodox, people sleep in churches of Saints Cosmo and Damian for healing dreams. And I think the potential is there now in Britain. There are many churches you can now sleep in. And if you ask for you have to ask for it. If you pray and ask for a healing dream, it may come to you. So I think there are many dimensions that we hardly scratch the surface of the potentialities of the modern pilgrimage movement, reviving and rediscovering some of these things that have long been known in other parts of the world. One of the is in India is, of course, the Kumbh Mela at Allahabad every 14 years, where up to 14 million pilgrims congregate in a kind of temporary city on the river Ganges to immerse themselves in the holy river. And they come from all over India, and there are sadhus in their orange robes walking there from all over India with their staffs. And of course, sadhus wander all over India from holy. A sannyasin is a sadhu, a renunciant with their orange robes, are supposed to spend only 3 days in any given place, so they're perpetual pilgrims. The Hindu model of life, as some of you will probably know, is that you spend the first stage of your life as a brahmacharya, a student, you're learning. Then the second stage, you become a householder, and then you have all the responsibilities of raising a family, earning your living, maintaining your house. Then when your children have grown up and when they're all married, you can become a forest hermit, a vanaprastha. It's a kind of retirement. And even today, many middle-class Hindus take this quite seriously. They often have a shed at the bottom of the garden where they read holy books during the day. And the final stage is where you become a sannyasin, a renunciant. You undergo a kind of funeral service. Some of your old possessions are burned. You lose your caste, your social standing, and you take to the road, and you end your days as a pilgrim, if you can, dying in one of the holy places like Varanasi, Benares. So this is very much built into the whole tradition there, and it's still very much a living tradition. The pilgrimage that was my favourite one is when I was living at the ashram of Fr Bede Griffiths in Tamil Nadu, the last period of my time in India. It was a local Hindu holy mountain called Ayamalai. I used to go with friends, usually on bicycles, to near the foot of the shrine, and then you had to climb up more than 1,000 steps barefoot in the blazing sun. The steps got really hot. There were monkeys in the trees overhanging the steps that would snatch your banana if you didn't eat it fast. And then at the top was this Shiva temple with the image of Shiva in the center of it, a Shiva lingam. And like other Hindu temples, the holiest place is dark. You go into the temple and you go through these courtyards until you enter the sanctum sanctorum, and the image at the center of the temple is the darkness of the cave. You're going into the darkness of a cave, into the darkness of the heart, into the darkness of the interior, where the holiest place is. And when you do a puja, a Brahmin priest sits by the entrance to the cave-like shrine, and you make an offering, and then they light camphor on a little lamp and do what's called arati. They move it while the bell rings. They move it around to illuminate the image of the deity. And then they bring the arati, and you take the light from the arati, bring it to your head and your eyes. So it reveals the God within the darkness. And that's they're typical of all Hindu temples, that the central core of them is dark. And in this one, Ayamalai, the sacred image was, of course, the lingam, which is the erect phallus, which is the principal symbol of Shiva, as a symbol of energy and vitality and life. It was a very powerful place with an incredibly archaic feeling to it. I was so influenced by this Indian pilgrimage, that all these pilgrimages I saw in India, that when I thought about England, I thought, what a shame, none of that in England. I realized that actually England is full of most wonderful holy places, that pilgrimage is possible here again. And so I started visiting holy places in England in a spirit of pilgrimage. This was long ago, this was 40 years ago. And it wasn't really until the late 1980s that pilgrimage began to take off in Europe with the rise of Santiago de Compostela. In 1987, 1,000 people walked there. As we just heard last year, it was close to 500,000. There's been this huge upsurge of pilgrimage all over Europe. And the British Pilgrimage Trust is part of the British aspect of this in helping to encourage and develop pilgrimage routes and facilities here in Britain. One reason I think it's particularly important here is because, as we just heard, pilgrimage was banned at the Reformation in 1538, and the British were no longer allowed to go on pilgrimages. So this, I think, left a void in the British soul, particularly the English, which was filled within a few generations by the English inventing tourism. Tourism is all about going to holy places, but going to them pretending that you're an Enlightenment rationalist and that you basically don't believe in all the mumbo-jumbo. You just go there out of an interest in art history. And I think the big paradigm shift that's going on at the moment is a paradigm shift back from tourism to pilgrimage, because tourism is, as Will Parsons used to say, is a form of frustrated pilgrimage. Because when a tourist gets to a great holy place, they can't light a candle if it's a cathedral and say a prayer. They think they've risen above that. They take photos, maybe. But that means they're not really connecting with the place. So I think the move back to pilgrimage means that people can once again connect with holy places. And that is extremely rewarding. Whatever spirit you go on, whether you're going to give thanks, whether you're asking for something, whether you're fulfilling a vow, whether you're on a journey at a stage, a life transition journey, whatever the reason, connecting with a holy place which literally joins heaven and earth can be, and often is, a transformative experience. Finally, I'd just like to point out a curious development in our modern globalized world. A few years ago, I was visiting a friend in Basel, Switzerland, and we had a free afternoon. He said, "What would you like to do?" And I said, "Well, are there any pilgrimage places near here, because I'd love to visit one if so." And he said, "Well, yes, there's a wonderful one called Mariastein, which is a shrine of the Blessed Virgin, who is in a cave. There's a church, but then you go down a kind of tunnel on the side of a chasm, and then there in the middle of this chasm with sheer drops and the tunnels built into the side of it is this cave with a black Madonna. And it's a very powerful place. But when I got there and I was in the cave, and I was fascinated to see that the other pilgrims there were principally Tamils, speaking Tamil. And in the offering plaques on the wall of the tunnel as you went down, quite a few of them were written in Tamil script. And so I said to him, "What's going on here?" He said, "Well, the Tamils have discovered this. It's the shrine of the Great Mother. They call her the Mother. It's the goddess for them. The great Marian shrine in Tamil Nadu, the Shni, has a pilgrimage with about 1 million pilgrims a year, at least half of whom are Hindu. For the Hindus, it doesn't matter what name it is, it's all the Great Mother Goddess." And so Tamils in Central Europe have discovered the shrine of Mariastein. It's now a major place of Indian pilgrimage. And a few months ago, my wife Jill and I went to a wedding in North Norfolk, and we visited the shrine of Walsingham, Our Lady of Walsingham. And again, exactly the same thing was happening there. While we were in the shrine, a Tamil family came in and did their devotions. They knelt, they lay down, prostrated, kissed the floor. No English pilgrims were doing that. But in a fascinating way, our holy places here are now becoming places of pilgrimage for Hindus and for people from other parts of the world. So pilgrimage is now becoming globalized in a new way, as well as being rediscovered. Well, those are just a few reflections, and I just want to end by saying how pleased I am that the British Pilgrimage Trust is doing such fantastic work. The trustees and Guy and Dawn and all those who work with it are making a huge impact. And there are plans afoot now to and school pilgrimages, which I think will be a very exciting new development, to introduce young people to pilgrimage at an early age. They'll then know that this potential is open to them for the rest of their lives. So I think it's a very exciting phase we're in at the moment, as this whole new pattern of pilgrimage grows and will continue to grow. Thank you.